JJ, Carlos, welcome to Talk Python to me. Great to have you two here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's really fun to have you both here. It's the week of Posit for me here at Talk Python. Just coincidentally having two groups from Posit on at basically almost the same time, right? Last episode was Great Tables, which made me have a much deeper understanding and appreciation for what you can do with tables. I thought, well, what is there more than like kind of an Excel look to it, formatting maybe.
Yeah, that's what most people think, and then they see like 4 examples and like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. But no tables. Well, there might be a table in the presentation today, but that's not the topic. It's more about leveling up your notebook game, right?
Yeah, I think that's the most. I think that's the most sort of straightforward win for Python users is sort of the ability to go from a Jupyter notebook to a website, to an academic article, to a report, with parameterization, to an ebook, sort of growing from a notebook to the many different ways in which you want to share it with people.
I mean, and put maybe just a little bit more broadly, we data scientists create all kinds of very, very valuable things with their code. And this can be, as we said, tables, it can be visualizations, can be the results of models. And then how do I project that out into the world? How do I make it valuable for other people? And a lot of times that means turning it into some kind of production output, a PDF, a report, a dashboard, a website. And so I'd say that's, in the large, what Quarto is about.
Yeah, I think it's a super cool tech. I've been hearing a lot of people recommend it lately, which is always a good sign, always encouraging. Before we dive into that whole side of things, though, let's hear a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Sure. Quick introduction, and how'd you get to working on Quarto and data science and all that?
Sure. My name is JJ Allaire, and I have been a kind of software tool builder for, I guess it's almost 30 years now, which dates me quite a bit. But I've worked on
lots how that catches up on you.
It's really like what? Yeah. And I've worked on web servers and development tools and authoring tools and programming languages and lots of different things. But about I guess coming up on 15 years ago, I decided that I wanted to focus on open source software. And I had early in my career, prior to becoming a software engineer, I was very into quantitative analysis and for economics and political science. And I used a bunch of the tools that were available at the time. And so when I found out about, this is actually even before like PyData was a thing, before Pandas was a thing, I was like, oh, there's open source statistical computing, R, amazing. I can just work on that. So that's kind of what I did. I set out to improve the computing tools around R, and I worked on RStudio. And then I won't go into all the gory details of that, but really that led into a lot of these use cases, because a lot of the people using R were trying to figure out how to share and publish their work, whether they be writing scientific articles or inside a company presenting things. And so I worked on a thing called R Markdown, which was like, merging R and Markdown for publishing things. And then that more recently led to, wow, like it's great that we did this thing for R, but that's like 10% of the universe. So can we generalize this? And that was like the genesis of Quarto. Like, let's generalize this idea and make it truly multi-engine. And it really is. It works with R, it works with Jupyter, it works with, the Julia, is it the Plato? No, the Julia, there's a Julia engine. There's 2 Julia engines, actually, that it works with observable. So the idea was like, let's take this core idea and make it work everywhere where there's interesting computations happening. So anyway, that's a little my history.
Yeah, amazing. And if you capture or have tools for the Python space and for the JavaScript space and the R space, that's a good coverage of the data science world.
It seems to be. Yeah. That was our idea.
Yeah. Awesome. Carlos, how about you?
Thanks. My name is Carlos Scheidegger. I'm an engineer here at Posit. I've been working on Quarto since I joined about 2.5 years ago. My background is in computer science. I'm a recovering academic, like I tell folks. I came to the US in 2005 for grad school. And I was working on a completely different area. I was working in sort of like geometry processing, computer graphics. But as part of my work in research, I started realizing that a lot of the experiments we were publishing in papers had sort of a depth of like parameter settings and sort of choices and things that like really dominated the output result. And it was really hard to go on a paper and see what was happening there and sort of be able to figure out like what were the choices that someone made when they published the work, how do I compare my work to theirs? And so I switched, and I, as part of my graduate work, I built a system in Python for sort of reproducible computational analyses and sort of how do you share these work, and sort of, as you're sharing like a PDF, you'd get like all of the parameters and all of the things that came with them. So this was back in 2008, sort of ancient history at this point. I then sort of joined AT&T Research at that point, and they have a really strong R team there, and sort of started doing some related work there. And that's sort of how I crossed paths with JJ as they were founding our studio back a long time ago. And we more or less kept in touch. Yeah. And so I eventually joined academia and kept interested in sort of this work on how do we make sure that the experiments that we have are as easily shareable as the artifacts that we end up all reading, like the PDFs, the websites. But if you need to go back to figure out what did actually happen there, we want to make that as easy as possible. And so the idea of Quarto resonated really strongly with me. And so as I was realizing that there's a lot of academia that I didn't wasn't a great fit for me personally. We can have a separate conversation about that. I reached out to JJ, and he talked about Quarto and said, this sounds like a great project. And we really hit it off, and I've been working on it since we started. Yeah. So that's
a couple years
how I ended up here.
That's cool.
That's right.
I think there's a lot of overlap on the data science side between R people and Python people, and R tools and Python tools.
There's a lot more overlap than I think folks realize from the outside, when you sort of notice that like the people working on these tools end up sort of picking the tool that's best for the job, and Python is fantastic. Like I've been writing it for 20 years, and sort of you find people trying to find similar solutions to problems, and sort of some things are more easily expressible or easily to reach for in one language or another. But I think in 2024, the story is that more often than we realize, like teams and even people are like, they're polyglots, right? So they will speak like, they will write enough Python, they will write enough R, but they want something that sort of works together as well as you can. And so that's something that we've focused on Quarto very, very explicitly. So you can have a website in which, half of your team is working in R and half of your team is working on Jupyter notebooks, and they both can work on the environments that are most comfortable for them. Observable, so directly in HTML and JavaScript. Yeah. So that's really part of what we're trying to do, is sort of make it as natural as possible for people to keep continuing their work, but then be able to publish it and sort of not forget like all of the computational things that came with it, and make it easily accessible and so on. Yeah.
I think also another demographic, another group in this is the people who are receiving the research, receiving the stuff. They might not be either of those people. They don't want to see a bunch of code and then a df.head and then then a plot, and then they want a report looking thing.
That's right. Yeah, and we've definitely done a lot, because it really does vary. I would say the preponderance of people are in that category. I would say maybe 85% of the people are in that category. But then you do get the odd person who says, well, wait a minute, where did this come from? So we have a bunch of things, like for publishing notebooks that let you, interactively show the code or not, show all the codes, don't, show the source code. We have a feature where like you see a plot in a website, and it's just a plot. There's nothing, and there's a little text here at the bottom that says source notebook. You click it, and now suddenly you're in a notebook that yielded the plot. So ways to make the computations available without hitting people over the head with it.
That's cool. It's almost the equivalent of right-click view source of the early web.
Right, exactly.
But for data science.
Yeah, that's very much the outputs we're looking for.
But really, to your point, I mean, that's when I say production output, it's like the quality of output that people are used to getting, out of like Office, or when people make professional PDF reports. That's kind of what people are looking for at some level. Sometimes people just want, hey, just give me the information. I don't need it to be, but a lot of times they want the production quality. And so we do spend quite a bit of time on making that possible.
Sure. And I would say the other thing that seems like this solves a bunch is I have a notebook I created myself. How do I share it with the world?
Yeah.
Right. A lot of data scientists are like, there's interesting solutions out there, but there's a lot of uncertainty on what to do. Do I need to learn how to do Django or Flask? Probably not.
Right.
Do you lean on something like Streamlit, where you kind of program to their model, but it's cool and interactive?
Right.
What do? You export to a PDF and just, or HTML, just here's the notebook, but static, right? None of those are. Streamlit's a pretty interesting option, but it's a very focused sort of tool, right? It's not a publication tool for sure. It's more an interactive tool.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the really interesting things that happens when you sort of engage with the folks that are actually trying to produce this, like in a company or, in an academic department or like in a government agency. Those stories you just said, like, do I want a PDF? Do I want an HTML? They are all true, but for different stakeholders.
Yeah.
Right? So, if I'm a data scientist in a company and I want the CTO to see what I'm doing, the CTO is not going to have time to go pore over the sort of gigantic report that has all the details. They want something that has up-to-date data that looks in a sort of expected, like might have the company branding and so on, and ideally something that's like emailed to them, like on a daily basis, right? So we want the same notebook that you've used to sort of create your analysis to go as easily from that into something that can be like a scheduled send with CI or with one perhaps Posit's commercial offerings, or you can easily publish it as HTML through GitHub Pages, through Netlify, or through your own provider. Or
I see. So you get basically a static site that you can publish as you see fit, right? Okay.
That's right. So at the very basic, right, Quarto sort of jumped a gun a little bit. Quarto is a command line tool that you can use, and you can take your notebook, right, as an input, like your IPyNB file, and just say Quarto render, and then we will produce an HTML file. So you're sharing your screen now. So if you go and get started on quarto.org's webpage, which is where we are right now, you see there's a tutorial for computations on the left sidebar, and then there's sort of a number of different pathways that you can go through there. And one of them is Jupyter, which is actually the one that you're seeing there by default. And so in here, we're highlighting that you can take like your Jupyter notebook or your Jupyter lab input. Once it's saved to a file, you can just use Quarto directly to produce an HTML. So you can say Quarto render HTML, you can say Quarto preview, and that would generate sort of like a local hosted website. But you can say Quarto publish, and then we have publishing sort of targets to Hugging Face, to our own Quarto Pub free service, to GitHub Pages, to a number of other places. So at a very high level, you can take your notebook as it is, and you can produce a really nice looking HTML page that's available. Yeah. And one of the really fun recent things that happened is Hamel Hussein, NBDev guy, sort of fantastic author. So he's working for at Answers AI now, and they just published a service where you can literally go on Answers AI and point to a GitHub repository that has an IPyNB page, and they will dynamically sort of on the back end find that GitHub page, create the Quarto page from your notebook, and then just publish it. Right. Wow. So like sort of zero click, if you have a public repository on GitHub and you just want an HTML page to share with someone else, you literally do not have to do anything. You can just go there, get the output. And so that's a really sort of like zero click way to do that.
Yeah.
And then we want
go ahead. I was going to say it's called NB Sanity. You can find it at nbsanity.com.
Yeah. And I'll definitely
there's actually
in the show notes.
In the show notes also, I think there should be a link to Hamel's blog post announcing it. And he goes into more details, because one of the cool things is that you can actually use, even if you're not running Quarto, you can put a bunch of the Quarto options in there. You can say, oh, I want to show source code or not show source code, or make source code expandable, and if you just put those in your notebook, when they render it, then they actually use those. So it's sort of a way to use Quarto to publish your notebooks without even installing Quarto. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it basically, if you can just figure out the URL to put together, it's it'll just pull it together for you. And
Yeah. And I think that is like the concept of Quarto, which is, okay, I have Python code or I have a notebook and I want to project it and I want to do that in a flexible way. And that's, that sort of web is like a default case. But I think the thing that people should also understand is that we really do go quite a ways beyond that with like making PDFs, making Word documents, stitching things together in a website, making presentations, So it's there's a lot there. One of the curses of it is actually it can be a little hard to explain. It's like, what is Quarto? Oh, publish anywhere, anything, any computation, any language.
It does all the stuff. It doesn't.
That doesn't really concretely connect with anything that I'm thinking that I want to do. But if you dig into it, it does, I think, connect pretty well to the things that people want to do.
But I think there's interesting value to be gained from those kinds of decisions. Michael, I know you had recently Charlie Marsh on the podcast in UV and Rough and all these tools, right? And sort of UV has taken a few of these moves that make perfect sense, which is as you start sort of like consolidating these tools, there's a lot of really interesting use cases that arise naturally from the way you can compose them, right? So yes, we have render, we have publish, we have preview, and it takes a little bit of time for you to explain. But in the end, you get the system that sort of like grows with you, and we hope it will be the tool that people reach for when they have sort of like data science, technical content production needs. And so
instead of trying to like yourself, trying to piece together, say, I'm going to try to convert my notebook to Markdown and then use Pandoc on this and then run this tool against it. If you guys own that whole workflow, then there's new opportunities. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
That's correct.
That's right. Yeah.
So as an example, folks have, we talked about Hamel and NBDev. Another web page that folks might have known or sort of website and company is Fast AI, right? So Jeremy Howard's sort of initiative. Fast AI is a Quarto website. No
kidding.
So just go on Fast AI right now. If you open the source, so fast.ai is the...
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
So this is actually a Quarto website. So the blog here is all of these. So if you see there, it's published with Quarto 1635 or something there.
Incredible.
And these are all written directly from notebooks. So the entries in here on the blog entries, they're all IPyNB files. And then Quarto, among the other things we can do, is sort of collate all of the different sort of blog entries you have, make listings so you can filter them. So this is very useful for a blog. It's useful for folks that have sort of like an ongoing set of reports that like need to be sorted chronologically. If you have an academic website and you want to list your articles, that kind of stuff comes up all the time. But the input for all of those are IPyNB files, right? So work entirely in IPyNB, and so from there we generate the HTML, we sort of extract the headers and create the listings all sort of automatically. So this is like an entirely Quarto website.
That's incredible. I guess it makes sense being a static website that it's pretty well suited for this. A lot of these tools that I talk to people about, they're like, this is a great thing for internal publishing of our site, or it's a great thing if you were going to interact with it, but it's kind of heavyweight and it doesn't really support a lot of design, and it's not you would never build your public website with this. It's like what I hear from a lot of these tools, right? But this is pretty excellent.
This you definitely can.
Well-known site.
We leaned pretty hard into allowing a lot of CSS customization. So we use Bootstrap, and we have a whole theming system that's really based on Bootstrap themes, but you can use SCSS directly to create your own themes. So, it's you can just go like, oh, make me a nice website. I don't want to think about it. People do that. But then people who really want to like party on, I want to make this look just so, can absolutely do it.
So
great.
We might miss. Go ahead, Marco. I was going to say we might miss a little bit of the details for folks who are only listening. But another example that you might want to search just to show sort of, the range where you can go from that. It's also another Quarto website. So if you just search for real world data science, this is an initiative from the Royal Statistical Society. They have a website, which, that one. So they have a number of different writers that write sort of like columns and content pieces and ideas. This is also a Quarto website. So I believe this one is based on Markdown. So they are using, instead of IPyNB as inputs, they use our Markdown. But the same sort of thing. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is that you can see how very different it looks, right? So it has categories and things like that. But if you want to take sort of, the time to do these and sort of have all the like the banner images and the sort of like that kind of thing, you can absolutely do it. And the result you get to publish through a number of different places that you might want to.
Cool. Yeah, for people listening, it kind of has that landing page look with the hero section with big pictures. Right. It doesn't feel very notebooky at all. That's for sure. Another use case out in the chat is Kevin O'Malley says, I teach a summer school on using Quarto for academic publishing in the university I work in. It's a great tool, but we spend a lot of time thinking about how to make documentation better. Interesting. Cool.
Documentation is part of I think Quarto's documentation is very good. Like, I honestly say this without I think it's I don't want to say best in class, because folks have actually realized how important documentation is, and there's a lot of really good documentation out there. But I think we're up there. I think our documentation is very good. It doesn't mean that it couldn't be better. And I think part of the issue with Quarto is that diffusion of entry points that we talked about earlier, right? Do you want to make a single PDF? Do you want a website? Do you want
dashboard?
And all of those become different places. And are you coming from a Julia background? Are you coming from a Python background? Are you coming from an R background? So we try to create these like different entry points on the Get Started webpage, and our guides are customized for VS Code experience, for Jupyter experience, and so on. But we 100% agree that documentation remains one of the hardest parts for us.
If you click on the guide tab at the top, you'll see that I know everyone can't see this, but like it's just such a vast number of things, and it is easy to feel lost. We try to organize it, but it's like, what does this not do? So it's a
little bit of a choose your own adventure.
It's a little bit of that, which is not always what people are looking for. They might be looking for like, no, tell me I want to get this to happen. Just give me step 1 through 4. And I think we could probably stand to do a little more of that.
Yeah, but here, this is kind of a decision tree. Like, what are you trying to do? Authoring? Are you trying to do diagrams? Okay. Are you using Python? Okay, you go down this path, and then we'll help you.
Yeah.
One thing I want to touch on, just I know a lot of people have not experienced this. I know you two have. I have, and it's mind blowing. This is somewhat built upon Pandoc, right?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
And Pandoc is ridiculous. Right,
it's ridiculous. It is like the biggest workhorse that software that no one knows about. It's an incredible piece of software.
If you're like, well, I have a LaTeX document, and I want it as a media wiki markup format. Could I possibly? You could just convert those. If people, I'll link to it, the pandoc.org website. On the right, there's a little gray. I don't know what you would call it, but it's a gray. It looks like if you drew the diagram for rock, paper, scissors, but 500 ways. And it shows all the connections. Given one doc, how do I get? Basically the given one format, what other formats can it go to? And literally, it's illegible because it converts so many things to others, and that's a really interesting foundation for you guys, right?
Well, I wanted to talk about this a little bit because I think that the really big idea behind Pandoc is a consequence of the big idea is that you can do all this conversion. But the big idea behind Pandoc, if you're familiar, like in programming languages, when you're parsing and writing interpreters, you have this abstract syntax tree, right? Or IL. There's a sort of a abstract representation of the program, and then you can compute on it. And I think what Pandoc has done is they've created essentially an abstract representation of a document. And so we think of documents as just like, we just spray a bunch of content into a file and it's just a big blob. Pandoc views documents as something you can compute on. And so all the things that might be in a document, tables and footnotes and figures and bullet lists and, all these things are in an abstract model. And so what happens is it takes that, whatever that is, Word doc or Markdown file, and it brings it into its abstract model. And now you can actually compute on the document. And that's really actually the heart of how Quarto is able to do, Quarto is built on Pandoc. And it's how we're able to do almost everything, is that we're actually not just dealing with text and markup. We're dealing with this sort of abstract model of a document, and then we can do all these powerful things with it. So I don't know if you want to expound on that. You probably could expound way too long on that, Carlos, if you chose to. But
No, but I think the shortest important bit is, so Pandoc operates on this abstract syntax tree. It's a document that has paragraphs. Paragraphs can have spans with, strong text, underlined text, and things like that. And you can think of Quarto as a very, very big orchestrator of Pandoc and sort of like configuration orchestrator or like choreographer for Pandoc. So Quarto itself is a command line application. We ship Pandoc with it. So like our bundles all include Pandoc with it. But fundamentally, we are a TypeScript application that sort of puts itself in front of Pandoc and then after it, right? So, all of the complicated things you might want to do to generate multiple websites, to extract bits of the document, to know the titles, to create your blog posts and your entries, right? So Quarto gets in front of it, does all of that orchestration work, then calls Pandoc a number of times, and then calls sort of some post processors. And the way this integrates with engines and Jupyter and so on is what we call engines in Quarto are the things that turn your document that has executable code with a document that has the results of the execution, right? And so all that needs to happen for an engine in Quarto to exist is that it takes Markdown or Jupyter Notebooks as input, and then it produces Jupyter Notebooks as output, or the Markdown annotated with those results. And then we just sort of process them and send to Pandoc, right? So really, Pandoc is at the center of what we can do with Quarto, and you can think of Quarto is just sort of sitting around it and sort of expanding the scope of the things you can do with Pandoc.
We've done a few more things, like to use Pandoc, typically, there's 160 command line options, and you just kind of figure out how to, it's tremendously powerful. So we've tried to, I would say, organize that experience a little bit. So it's like, I just say I want a PDF and it's in YAML, and I do a couple options and it does the right thing. So I think, you can think of Pandoc properly as like this sort of engine that you can do anything with. And we try to give you like the happy path to a bunch of things that you probably want to do.
I think that's hugely valuable, because while Pandoc is great, it's also super complicated. And a lot of times if you want to combine different documents, maybe I'm actually working on a project that has a bunch of Markdown files, but they really need to be one Markdown file in a certain order, and then that thing gets processed. But then as it gets transformed, there needs to be changes to it. And I can program, I can write that code to do it, but there's a ton of common use cases, like take this notebook and publish it on the web. That could just be built into your tool, right?
So one of the thing that sorry, go ahead, Carlos.
Go ahead, JJ. It's okay.
I was going to say, even the thing you're talking about, I need to paste together a bunch of files and turn it into a single file, or turn it into a book, or turn it into a, those are things that we facilitate those sort of things as well.
Nice.
Like this is really a book, actually, and it's got 20 chapters, and each one is its own file. And when it's a website, I just want it to be like a website that lets you navigate my book. When it's a Word doc, I want them all concatenated together into a Word doc, et cetera.
Right. And then with final destinations and EPUB and a PDF or something.
Yeah, EPUB. Yeah, or EPUB or PDF. Sure. Yeah, make the EPUB. Create the EPUB archive just so, and so. Sorry, Carlos.
I was just going to say that to Michael's use case of sort of having a number of Markdown documents and so on. I wouldn't presume to say you should use Quarto. Maybe it's a good tool for you. But one of the things that we do believe in very strongly is sort of making, it's a principle that we try to abide by, sort of making hard things easy, but never at the expense of making very hard things impossible. So, we will provide you the happy path. We sort of, the standard YAML options. We have validation for them. We have completion. We have sort of integrated documentation if you're in VS Code, for example. But if you need to actually extend things, we give you a number of escape hatches and entry points. And so if you're in a Quarto project, for example, we have a fairly complete system of like pre-render scripts and post-render scripts, where we'll give you the set of things that we found on your project. You can run TypeScript code against it. You can run Python code against it. Tell us what you've done to pre-process our project or to post-process our project. So if you need to start by collating Markdown documents, or by going to some database and pulling the documents that you want to render on a web page, all of those things are enabled by this pretty extensive extension system, for lack of a better term. Sort of we try to put extension entry points in as many places as we can, so that folks are not stranded when they go from a simple project to inevitably something that's more complicated. So try to make Quarto grow with them as your project tends to inevitably grow as well.
Yeah, that sounds really great. When I'm sure there's some pre-built extensions, but I also imagine that we could write our own.
That's
Is
right.
that in JavaScript? Is that in any language you want? Is that shelling out?
Well, so let me tell you. So a couple of the things are pretty open. So what Carlos said about pre-render, post-render, sure, any language that can be just the shell. Okay, there's a thing called Pandoc filters, which is essentially take the AST in and produce transform the AST. Those also can be written in any language, filters. So for example, there are 2 different libraries to write them in Python, but people write them in all kinds of languages. That's available. But I would say the official mechanism for extending that has more affordances, more APIs, more flexibility that we have is based on Lua, because Pandoc has an embedded Lua interpreter in it. So as it's running, they give you access to the runtime, and you can do all sorts of really flexible things inside Pandoc as you're running. So Lua is, if people aren't familiar with it, was originally created actually for embedded game engines. So the idea is we need very, very fast execution, very high level language. Very, it looks not dissimilar from Python, I would say. But it runs very fast. So for example, like the Cloudflare kind of what is it called? Envoy for like writing super high performance like REST proxies uses Lua. So like, okay, this code is going to run on every HTTP request that happens. We're not writing that in any language that isn't just going to be screaming fast. So I think the reason why Pandoc used Lua was they said, well, we can very easily embed it, and it's going to be fast. Because when you're processing documents with a lot of nodes in them, you really want to be using a language that's very fast at runtime. So it is Lua. And if you go to our website, there's a whole section on extensions. And we do quite a bit to, let's see. Yeah, go to, where's extensions, Carlos? It's got to be.
Yeah, if you just search for extensions, you should be able to find good documentation and sort of, you can start from templates.
Right.
That's right.
There's a bunch of ones that people, these are ones people have already done. So they've sort of added features. Yeah.
Oh, you guys support the concept of short codes.
Yes, we
have short. You can write your own short codes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can write that. The 2 kind of workhorse extensions are short codes and filters. And so short codes are like content injectors. Filters are content transformers. And so you can see examples of different short codes and filters that people have.
Yeah, so an example for people who maybe are not familiar with this idea is pretty common in static websites. Yeah, static site generators. For example, Hugo has the concept of short codes as well. Yeah. And it's like, I want to write in Markdown, but I also want to embed a YouTube video.
Exactly.
80% of the width. And that is like an iframe and all sorts of
Exactly.
Yeah. The video short code we support natively.
So we have a video short code that's built in. We wrote a video short code built in because for this, it's so common. But people make these specialized ones. One of my favorite ones was somebody, it was like a short code, and you like give it some kind of, I don't know what that was. It was like some kind of like chemistry or biology, code, and it creates this like interactive molecule visualizer, right in
like a 3D, whatever the language for 3D stuff in the browser is that came out 10 years ago.
It's wild, and you're just a short code, you give it one little code, and it just does it. So so these are written in Lua, but and part of that is also because we want again this idea of being Pandoc supports Lua, but we also want people to run these extensions with 0 dependencies. So like if I'm I write an extension, I don't know if you've got R or Python or like, I don't know what you're, and I don't want to have to satisfy a bunch of dependencies. So we want to have like fast, dependency free, and well integrated with Pandoc. So that's why we ended up with Lua. And we like it. And it's served us well. We did some stuff in our Quarto extension. We do a bunch of we actually add a bunch of static typing annotations for Lua, so that it's like we get really nice autocomplete and linting and stuff. So
yeah, cool. JJ, if 5 years ago, if you said I need to write an extension in Lua,
yeah,
I would have to learn Lua. Maybe not but I would have to learn.
Yeah.
I could probably write that. I could probably write it in
Yeah.
Python or R, and then just tell ChatGPT I want it in Lua.
You definitely could. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So,
what do you guys think about this crazy LLM stuff that's taking over programming?
I think it's pretty interesting. I think it's I would say that I was kind of a little wary of it until I saw, I'd say probably Claude 3.5 and 0.1 are a huge step change in capability. And so I was kind of waiting for that. But seeing that, I would say they're already now quite effective at accelerating many parts of development. I think part of what we have to do is figure out the sort of what is the right, I think for most types of software for the foreseeable future, it's going to be human in the loop, I believe. And so what is the interface for human in the loop? What does it look like? Is it, it can go all the way from do a thing that's complicated, let me see the diff and I'll approve it, to I just want to talk about it and then I'll do it, to let's talk about it and you can do some things, and I'll tell you if they look good or not. And I think that's a really interesting area of exploration for the tool building community for the next few years.
I agree. It's super interesting. I don't have it build stuff for me, but there's a lot of times I'll be like, I could look this up, but I'd like to see an example from it, and then I'll take it and make it mine. Or I have a thing, explain it to me. Like, what does this regular expression do? Or what does this curl command do again? I can't be bothered to study them.
I have a funny anecdote about this because I do the same thing. Like, let me look this up. So I was writing I was working on a VS Code extension, and I was basically trying to save some state, per workspace state. And I'm like, I know there's a one-liner for this. Actually, VS Code, they have this built in. So I said, I just want to do some per workspace state. Like, how do I do that? And it goes, oh, great. And it goes like, I'll make workspace state manager. And it produces like 180 lines of code, and it's got events, it's got all this stuff. And I'm like, isn't there like a one-liner? I'm like, oh, totally. There is a one-liner. Like here, it's right here. So you do have to, when you have it try to build stuff for you, you have to kind of go, don't lead the witness too much,
Yeah, for sure. I want to hear Carlos' thoughts, but I will just add that I think people who try to just say, I'm going to take this thing and just have it build the thing and then build the next thing. And if you take it too far, you're going to end up with a pile
you're dead in the
of
water.
something you cannot understand. You cannot maintain. It doesn't quite do the thing.
That's exactly
that.
right.
Yeah. Carlos, you spend a lot of time. Yeah, I agree. Carlos, you spend a lot of time universities teaching people. Well, this is
it's interesting. I left, I think, just before this became really, really bad. My spouse actually teaches Intro to Python, and so she's sort of much closer to the thick of the bad parts of like sort of exposing like this really access to LLMs for folks who don't otherwise understand what's happening. And so I'm of two minds of this. One is I think there's something fundamentally complicated for us to handle, us as in like society and humans, which is it is much harder to tell that something might be wrong than to generate the output, right? Sort of it's really complicated, right? Like it's actually just genuinely hard to do so. And it's even harder when you don't have the expertise. And so it's absolutely the case that there's a number of folks that are using ChatGPT to generate code, to generate sort of solutions to homework is like the bad case that happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
But even if you sort of step that aside and say like there's no grade in play or anything like that, the risk is that folks really don't have the ability to tell when something is going bad or wrong. And I think that's a complicated thing to do. The counterpoint that I think is quite interesting is that we have computers right in front of us, right? Like, if ChatGPT gives me like a snippet of Python code, one thing I can do with it is I can run it myself, right? Like, I can go and check it, right? And so I think the places where I find it to be extremely valuable are like when it tells me something that I can very easily verify whether or not it's the case, right? Sort of like I say, okay, tangentially, I'm trying to teach myself Rust because it's 2024 and like that's what everyone else is doing. And I found it to be sort of exceedingly valuable to just sort of like, ask for something, how do you do that in Rust? And it gives me something. And I just, sort of use the code, and then like I go look at what it does, and sort of, but I'm actually the one running the Rust code, right? Or something else is there's a like third party that can verify the output in like a meaningful sense, and that combination to me seems really powerful. Sort of like the ability to sort of generate these potential things with my ability to quickly check whether they are true or not. That seems transformative to me.
Totally agree.
And so that's where I think it's most exciting work that's going to come out, is how do we combine like these things. And one fascinating thing to me is that if you think about like PyLance, PyWrite, or Pydantic, these sort of like typing efforts for Python that exist in many other languages, something like an LLM gets to benefit a lot from it on both sides, because the annotation is information that it can use to sort of figure out what it actually needs to tell you. But you can also use the annotations, because the annotations means that there are fewer valid programs out there, right? That's what a type system does. It disallows some programs to exist. And so if it gives you a wrong result, it's much more obvious that that's the case.
Right. You might see a type error or type.
That's exactly right.
That's right. Yeah.
And so that to me is where I think all of this stuff is happening. So you mentioned you're a mathematician by training, Michael. Terence Tao is a Fields medalist, sort of very famous number theorist guy. He's been talking a lot about his efforts to use Lean, which is an automated theorem prover. So people are sort of trying to formalize mathematics through automated theorem prover, a programming language that has like formal semantics and so on. And using LLMs for sort of coming up with ideas for like the proof strategies and so on. And there, if the theorem is proven wrong, it will tell you right away.
Domain.
And so that's the kind of thing that's very, very powerful to me.
That makes me nervous. Go ahead, JJ. Sorry.
I was going to say, I'll often, for something that's a little complicated, I'll have it generated. I'll look as Carlos said, I'll look it over. Maybe I'll run it, and then I'll say like, now write me a ton of tests. And then like, did you test for this? Did you test for that? Did you? And then suddenly there's like 80 tests, and that helps. That's a little bit. That's not a guarantee, but it helps with that closed domain kind of thing.
Right.
Not a proof checker, but it's approximating that.
Yeah, I didn't mean necessarily to take us this deep down the LLM path, but it's amazing. It's super interesting.
It's easy to go there. It's easy to go there.
It's affecting all of us so much, and I think it's going to bifurcate the software developer world. On one hand, I think folks who are like you guys are saying, I can check it, I'll take it, then I'll run with it. It's only going to make it better, faster, right? You want a Quarto extension, you don't know Lua, no problem, it doesn't matter, right? We'll make that work fine. On the other hand, I think, to your wife's position, Carlos, I think there's a really serious danger that LLMs will stunt the growth of students.
You already see it happening.
Hard problems.
Unfortunately, this is already happening. And it's a really, I think it's a shame, because in computer science specifically, the fix is easy, right? The computer is right in front of you. You can test that, right? Like that kind of perspective that like, you have a computer in front of you that can run code and tell you what it's doing. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. That perspective is so important, right? That's why open source is so amazing. You can like go into the Python code and like download it and try different things. There's no one stopping you from doing that. So for computer science, I do think that we have an easier way out. Where I think this is terrifying is where folks use LLMs as a search engine with having no idea that this thing invents the fact that, I don't know, like George W. Bush has issued a pardon that he I think right? That kind of stuff comes up, right? People publish stuff on the news without realizing this. It's already here, and it's not just students, it's everyone.
It's a slightly broader point, and then we can get off the LLM train here, but a slightly broader point that typically to get the most out of these things in a lot of domains, and this could be law or medicine, programming, you really need like substantial human expertise to oversee them. And that person probably has 10 years of experience. And so so great. Okay. So those people are going to become more and more valuable. I know how to be the human in the loop because but how do we develop the new, the 10 years of experience? How do I ever get the 10 years of experience if I'm constantly letting the LLM do things and I'm never learning anything? So that's the crisis, I would say.
It's an absolute crisis. It's going to be a real problem in a few years. How do you make the gap from new out of school to I have the 10 years experience? That is going to be a huge problem.
It is huge problem. Yeah.
But you know William Gibson's quote about like the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. That problem already exists.
Yes.
It doesn't need LLMs for that, right? This problem of checking expertise, right? To tie back to the Quarto conversation, right? Like a number of what got me started in the reproducibility crisis is this inability for us to tell whether some output of an academic paper is correct or not, right? Like it's really much harder to check. That is the same problem that now absolutely everyone is going to run into on every place, right? And where I think Quarto has something to say about it, and like this entire project of computational reproducibility and documents that have the code that generated them, is that you have the ability to check, right? So, our manuscript support that JJ alluded to early, right? When you create a website, right, you have the entire website and there's a link to the side that's like, here's the code that generated it. You can run it on Binder, right? You can run it in code spaces. And so you can check
when you look right here, that's in the upper right. Yeah, this thing right here.
That's right. Yeah. So that shows the code statically, right? So there's a separate mode in which you not only have like the source code that you can see it, but you actually have the full IPyNB like available for you to run it on Binder and like check for yourself that it's actually producing the results that you expect, right? So you can go from the prose that is hard to tell whether it's true to the code that actually runs, so you can at least see what the person is using to make the claims that they did. And I think that kind of like integrated metadata that like sort of corroborates the statements you're making is only going to become more important as we go forward rather than less.
Yeah, I agree. That harkens back to your reproducible science initiatives, right?
That's exactly right.
So let's talk about using Quarto. Where can I run it? So it looks like it's supported at least on the major OSs, Mac, Windows, Linux.
Yep.
Right.
That's right. It's a command line tool that you can install separately. You can also just pip install it.
Interesting.
So
okay.
Works. Yeah. You can that's a lot of people do that. And you can pip install older versions and versions from GitHub and all that sort of thing. In terms of, I would say you can just use it with any editor with a command line tool. I do think it benefits from some tooling, like some autocomplete and some amount of just like, hey, preview this thing, show it to me. And so there is pretty good tooling across there. So there's like a Jupyter extension. There's a VS Code extension that does quite a bit of stuff. There's a NeoVim extension. There's integrated support in RStudio. So that's important. If you go to our get started thing, you can see we sort of let's see. I think you have to scroll up. You go to get started. It'll kind of, if you scroll down, we kind of say to you like, okay, what's your preferred tooling environment? And then we kind of set you up in that environment with the right extensions or other things. And so there's always use a text editor, but I think the tooling is helpful.
Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about when I was asking that, two of the things really that I think are rough edges that you probably solve that people don't necessarily know they're rough edges yet until they try it, is one, Pandoc has a lot of dependencies that are not obviously dependencies. Like, for example, I was trying to get some file out of Pandoc and it was saying this LaTeX thing is not installed on your Mac. I'm like, I don't even want LaTeX. Right. Why is this here? Why is this hassling me?
Right. We definitely, yes. We have definitely solved that. So it depends on the scenario. So for LaTeX, we don't embed a LaTeX distribution. However, if we notice you don't have LaTeX, we tell you just type Quarto install tool. It's what is our LaTeX distribution?
TinyTech.
TinyTech. Install TinyTech. And then that's actually a tech distribution that we maintain that is like very small, has different form factors and isn't like 5 gigabytes to start with and does auto installation of packages. So for that, we kind of say, you need LaTeX. We're going to make it super easy. So it's a one-liner. You can get LaTeX. In other cases, like Types is another people may or may not have heard of. It's sort of a competitor to LaTeX. It's another PDF, among other things, PDF engines. And it's a phenomenal tool. It's, creates incredible output. It has a much, to me, like more sort of natural and scalable, programmable interface than LaTeX does. We just embed the Types runtime in Quarto because there's not much to it. It's not huge.
Cool.
It's not
that's cool.
So
if you haven't
we just
used
go like that
Types, and you use PDFs, you generate PDFs as part of your day job, and you've heard of LaTeX, and you have the reaction that every single person that needed to use LaTeX is like fondness for the pain it caused and the quality of the documents it generates.
It generates incredible. It doesn't get better. It doesn't get better.
Gets to what I would say is 90% of the quality that LaTeX does. There are some micro typography tricks that they haven't quite incorporated yet, but they do a number of other things. And so Typest is genuinely amazing. I could not recommend it more strongly. It's a little weird to type. It's typst.app. It's another open source product. They have an offering that is sort of like a collaborative editor where you do those things, but you can use it as a command line thing. T as in typist. Typist without an I.
Typist.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, got it. All right. Wow.
Yeah, we can add that to the show notes.
It's hard to phonetically tell me how to type it and search it, but it's amazing. Once you know, it's gonna hit. This is not gonna come up. It's very searchable. Okay, I'll put it in the show notes.
It's a fantastic
incredible
tool. Yeah. Pandoc supports outputting from Markdown to Typest because, of course, they do, and so we can do that as well. And it's phenomenal. It's incredibly I hope in 5 years we will not have to reach for LaTeX. It's early, right? It's sort of existed for a couple of years, but I am genuinely, the team is extremely impressive. It will not surprise anyone if I say it's a Rust application because, again, of course it is. But they amazingly technical work. That's compilation is impossibly fast. To me, the difference between using LaTeX and Typest is the difference between using Mercurial and Git. If you ever remember the first experience when you said Git something and you just got the result back and you thought something went wrong, it could not possibly be this fast. That's the same impression you have from Typest. It generates this amazing PDF in 0.2 seconds. And you just look at your computer and I cannot believe this just happened. It's really nice. So we support
We've made a big investment. We've made a big investment in Typest, and so we bundle the runtime, and
amazing.
We're bullish on it.
All right, I'm gonna have to learn more about this. This is very exciting. Okay. So that was the one thing I want to talk about was the rough edges of tools like Pandoc and others. The other I want to talk about with you all is continuous integration. So you could set up, say, an automation in GitHub where somebody pushes a new version of a notebook, it automatically
that's right
pushes out.
So
we got Docker integration, we got GitHub Actions integration. What's the story?
So if you go in the guide here, just I know folks listening won't see this, but we'll just talk through. Go to publishing. You can see we sort of have this idea of I guess you can go to publishing basics there and it'll give you an overview of everything. So we basically have this idea. We have a Quarto publish command that can kind of publish to lots of different destinations. So it can publish to Netlify, GitHub Pages, some Posit things. We have our own little hosting service, Hugging Face Spaces. So the idea is we know how to talk to all those. And so you can just say Quarto publish, and it'll remember, you published to this URL before, you want to update it. So that's the workhorse for publishing. And then all of that works you can see at the bottom, there's a note publishing with CI. And all of this can work by basically put your token in CI, export the token into the environment, call publish. And so lots and lots of people use CI to update things with Quarto, and they may be publishing to GitHub Pages, maybe Netlify, maybe Hugging Face, maybe another service.
You want to give a shout out to Quarto Pub?
Yes, the Quarto Pub is just I don't
really know much about it. What is this?
It's literally just a free service that you can use to publish static documents and websites. And that really all we wanted to do here, it doesn't support all the fancy features like authentication and custom domains and all that. Our goal, and there are other services that do that, but our goal was to have a free service that makes it dead simple to publish your thing. You get your own subdomain, and you can just publish stuff. So we wanted it to be just I can definitely publish my thing to the web, and so that's kind of what it's for. And then if you want to do things for example, if you're using GitHub Pages, well, now I can have it authenticate, so only people who have access to the repo have access to the GitHub Pages, or if I'm using Netlify, I can do all manner of fancy things. So it's designed to be simple, easy, and free. to kind of get your stuff out to the web. So I use that like when if I go give a presentation and I have a slide deck and it's written in Quarto, I just put it on Quarto Pub.
Yeah, beautiful.
So
I suppose one of the other publishing destinations is just a pile of HTML, CSS.
That's right.
Figure that out.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Put it wherever. Yep. It's just going to make Quarto is just going to make a directory for a website. It'll be _site. For a PDF, it'll be a PDF, and
throw down some Nginx or Caddy, and off you go.
Exactly. Do whatever. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
One thing I will note about the CI just before we switch subjects is we have a repository that I think we linked to somewhere where we have a number of examples of using GitHub Actions. So it's GitHub/QuartoDev/Quarto Actions that we maintain, and we document with a number of different use cases that folks might want to do if they need to like grab dependencies, right? So your CI often where the sharp edges are that you're going to have to install R, you're going to have to install Python and so on. And so we have sort of a number of actions that will install Quarto, will render it, and it will publish it. So from there, you can just take it where it is, drop some of these into your own repository, and then you're off to the races. And so this is another place where we're trying to like reduce the sharp edges to like actually get people to see the stuff you built.
Yeah, cool. I'll link to it in the show notes so people can find it and use it. All right. We have time maybe. If we lightning round it a little bit, we got time for two things. I think we can do it. We can do it here. So one, this is open source under what license?
MIT,
and then
MIT.
There's MIT, which basically means that commercial, you can do whatever. So Quarto is sort of unencumbered in that sense that people can take and run with it. Yeah,
that's right. Exactly right. Yeah.
What's the business model? How does this tie back to Posit, and why is this?
Posit has Posit has a product called Posit Connect that is essentially like I would call it an enterprise publishing platform for what we call data products. And so Posit Connect does a lot of things. It publishes Shiny apps, it does Streamlit apps, it does Dash apps, it does Flask apps, it does apps, and it also does content. So it does websites or documents, and then it adds some things like, you can schedule the content. So like, run this, update this once a day, update this website once a day, or whenever this thing updates, send an email to these people. So that's the idea. So Posit Connect is a commercial product that we sell. And so I think from a business model standpoint, if people are successful with Quarto, as obviously we make it very easy to publish it to everywhere. We're not trying to privilege, or say, it's a Roach Motel, you have to publish with Posit Connect. But we do
Hotel
try
California.
to have we do try to have a value added product that focuses, I'd say, honestly, more on the like internal publishing, than the public publishing.
Yeah, that's cool. And just full disclosure, if people haven't listened to other episodes, you guys have sponsored the show before for Posit Connect, and I want to say thank you for that. Yeah, sure. Awesome. I really appreciate it. But this is not sponsored, right? This is just a super cool project. So, okay, so that was one of the ones I wanted to talk about. Just like how open is it? It feels a little bit like the Visual Studio Code model. Microsoft makes this. It would be awesome if there were some great integrations to Azure and encourage people. Right. Well, you can use it for whatever, right? People love it for whatever. But if there's the right use case, then hey, it's a perfect tool.
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. We've sort of we've tooled this up for internal, enterprise usage as much as we can. I'd say we've had lots of contributions. I think our biggest external contribution was, would you say, Carlos, the folks from Julia added the Julia engine, which is a pretty substantial piece of work. And so we very much like to collaborate and take pull requests, and
PRs are welcome, huh?
For sure,
are very welcome. Yeah,
and
awesome.
Currently, Quarto is, I think, a large code base that is not super approachable. I think that's a fair assessment that we would agree with. We are spending a lot of time in 2025 actually figuring out ways to sort of let the community in and sort of change the ways that people can write extensions and sort of make it easier for people to build on it. I will say that in contrast to the way that Microsoft does, like VS Code versus Codium, right? So we don't have two split products, right? So we have just Quarto, but it is true that inside Quarto, there are sort of things that only makes sense so there's a publish to like RStudio Connect, for example, right? So there are things that it integrates with RStudio that are inside the Quarto code base that are there because of RStudio.
Well, I think that's an entirely fair trade-off that people can make, right? They don't have to use those tools if they don't want.
Right.
It's an awesome tool for people.
Not at all. Yeah.
But you want to serve your customers as best you can.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know who wants to take this one, but people know Node.js. And one of the great ironies of a lot of these data science tools is a lot of the people working on them, for example, Jupyter themselves, it's kind of like, we'll take one for the team and we'll write all the JavaScript to make it interactive. So you all can stick in your data science language and not worry about it.
That's right.
And it sounds a little bit like that here. And so you guys are using Deno. One, how do you say that? Two, like what it's like an alternative to Node.js, right? What's the deal with this internal story?
Yeah, I don't know if it's pronounced Deno. I just usually pronounce Deno. But it is right? So it is so it has V8 inside it, just like Node does. It's actually founded by Ryan Dahl, who is the founder of Node, and he's now CEO and founder of Deno, the company behind it. So the main thing with Deno is sort of it really wants to be TypeScript first. So you can run JavaScript, but Deno has sort of like a really built-in type checker that uses sort of like, the TypeScript type checker, but it's really quite built in. And it has a really advanced capabilities system for folks that need to bundle things. You can run Deno and say, run Deno, but do not allow it to go on the net. Right, so run Deno, but do not allow eval to like import other things. Run Deno, but allow only access to the file system, or do not allow access to the file system, or do not allow. So they have a really fine-grained capability system that is quite nice. And for us, so that was so one of the things that we wanted was something that sort of let us just do that and quick, and sort of it's easily also embeddable. So Deno is like a single binary that you get to ship and you get V8 with it. And so we just bundle Deno internally. And so it's just a pleasant, like modern alternative to Node, where most of the standard library and all of those are TypeScript first. And so you have the really nice type annotations. The standard library is all in TypeScript, and you get access to that. And so that's what drew us to it.
This is cool. Yeah, I didn't know. I mean, I'd heard of it, but I hadn't really paid much attention. Wow, it's popular. 100,000 GitHub stars, and it's less than 2 years old or something like that. It's not bad.
Yeah, it's quite popular. They have a number of interesting things. So the company is built behind and trying to use this Deno deploy, which is sort of like this, serverless, where you ship TypeScript edge computing. And so, you can have like a very small piece of TypeScript instead of having Node that runs on the edge. And so that's their business model. For us, it's just a modern alternative to Node with all the lessons.
Awesome runtime. Yeah, you can embed. That's cool. All right. Guys, I think we're out of time here, as much as I want to talk more about it. But let's leave it with a little bit of a call to action. People are interested with Quarto.
Yep.
They want to get started. What do y'all tell them?
I would go to the quarto.org website, and I would literally there's a get started button, and it basically will let you pick your tool, whatever, VS Code or Jupyter or just NeoVim. And then it'll take you through a tutorial that's step-by-step that shows you the basic mechanics of the tool, and then it shows you how it works with computations, how you can embed code and run the code and control how the code is run and all that. So I think if you go through that tutorial, it'll probably take you, half an hour or something like that. You will have you'll be up and running, and you'll be in your favorite tool, and you'll have a very strong idea of what the thing can do and how it's useful. And then from there, I'd kind of just go back to the homepage and sort of browse through and say, okay, what can I do with this? So I can make dashboards, I can make presentations, I can make reports, I can make websites. And I think it'll be easier to connect concretely with those things once you've gone through the tutorial.
The other thing I want to point out is we have a pretty active discussion forum on GitHub. We don't have a Discord. We'll probably fix that in 2025. But we do keep a very close eye on both issues and on discussions. And sort of, we try very hard to be responsive to everyone. And sort of, if people want to share their work or ask questions, sort of take, the Quarto sort of documentation and then figure out like, okay, what are the things? How do I put them together? And they have questions. We keep a really, really close eye on that, and we try to be very responsive. So I would encourage people to just hop on GitHub discussion, ask questions, and we'll be there to help you.
Yeah, excellent. It's nice you guys have discussions, because a lot of times people will come and if there's no discussions, they'll file an issue, which is really a question. And you're like, well, when do I close this? Because I kind of answered it, but you don't necessarily know you answered it, and they won't close it because it's
that's right.
Anyway,
that's right.
Yeah, so awesome. Well, congratulations both of you on such a cool project, and I know it's doing good things for a lot of people. So
I want to quickly shout out just the folks. So, there's a large number of group folks like inside Posit that both help, like, sort of besides JJ and Charles, who contributed early, Christoph Dervue, Gordon Woodhull, Charlotte Wickham, Mine, Mikhail is a huge help on our issues as well. So it takes a village, and I just want to shout out those folks too. Yes.
Cool. That's excellent. All right. Bye, guys. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Take care.